Hello, I'm Jane and welcome to second lesson of my workshop with Strathmore. Throughout this series, we are filling a watercolor sketchbook together, and in this particular lesson we will explore landscapes and scenery motifs. So let's get started. Before we start the lesson, I'd like to introduce the materials that we are going to be using. So besides the Strathmore 400 series art journal that we are filling together, we're going to be using some drawing supplies. This is regular graphite pencil Rembrandt art design in 2B, so I like the pencil to be a little bit softer. Kneaded eraser is very helpful when you are erasing on a watercolor paper. We're going to be using kitchen salt for effects, and one special kind of effect that I like to use during painting landscapes and sceneries is regular sponge. So if you have something similar, then you can use it. Water bottle is a must. We're also going to be using this golden imitation Aquafine watercolor. This actually comes from the 48 color studio set Aquafine by Daler-Rowney. I will try to incorporate this into one scenery to explore some kind of stylization. I'm going to be using tube paints mostly in this lesson, and both Aquafine and MaimeriBlu, and individual colors I will introduce you during the demo itself. Lastly, brushes that we're going to be using for this lesson are mostly Princeton Neptune, but I'm also going to be using Princeton Aqua Elite. This is long round number 8. This is a bit stiffer brush. It will help me out with drawing in some details. This is a very helpful brush. But besides that, when I explore these landscapes and sceneries, I mostly try to go for flat brushes. So this is Mottler by Princeton Neptune 1.5 inch. This will help us to pre-wet the entire page and create large watery washes. Then this is Princeton Neptune Square Wash 1/2 inch. This is going to be very helpful also in creating larger, broader washes with that particular flat end brush stroke. And then I really like to paint with the 1/4 inch dagger brush by Princeton Neptune. This is going to give me some beautiful dry brush effects and will help me reach these tiny spaces to add details. And in some areas, this oval wash brush is also going to be helpful. This is 1/2 inch Princeton Neptune oval wash brush. So when you have all your supplies ready, we can start with the lesson. In this first demo, we will paint a very simple magical forest watercolor painting. When working with tube paints, I like to use white porcelain plates as my palette, and I separated the colors between two plates so that my warms and cools don't mix together much. I created a tilt by inserting masking tape beneath the sketchbook. As a reminder, 2 jars of water are always a preference. Try to keep one as clean as possible and your colors will never be too muddy. Colors that I'm using in this demo are sap green, olive green, cerulean hue, Prussian blue, permanent mauve, Quinacridone magenta, and cadmium orange hue. Let's pre-wet the page with the Mottler brush. This painting does not require any drawing. We will paint simple mountain silhouettes, but in this demo I want to demonstrate how to manipulate color to get depth in your painting. So here I'm trying to lay down different colors, starting with the warmer ones like orange and magenta. When you paint objects in distance, they appear much lighter and faded from those close to you, and so we need to water down our paint. I'll be adding a bit more intense paint with Mottler brush to create first line of mountains. Remember, these are far away and the silhouette can have blurred edges. You can use spray bottle to help with that if your first wash dries more quickly. I actually ended up having to go over the silhouette again because the color faded way too much. Then I tried to make the edge of my silhouette to be a little bit more sharp. So here I'm using dagger brush to draw in some tips of the trees. While this wash is still wet, I'm adding a bit of this beautiful golden imitation watercolor. This is a pen that comes with the Aquafine studio set. Adding a few splatters on top with both golden and regular watercolor, and we can let this first layer dry. Now we are ready to add another layer of mountains, and this will be a little bit more intense, but careful about using too much pigment here because we still need the paint to be transparent. I used oval wash brush and then spray bottle to diffuse the bottom part of the silhouette. I'm adding colors a bit more randomly, but still wanted to have more warm colors at the top, and we'll be adding more greens and blues as I approach the bottom of the painting. Here again, try to find a brush that has a nice tip and you can draw in some more defined treetops. They still will be a bit blurred out, so you don't really need to do the perfect silhouette. And also let's add the gold in the same way as before. I like to sprinkle some table salt while the wash is still wet and then I let it dry naturally. Salt will this way create a lovely crystallic effect. When everything is 100% dry, we can do the fourth mountain silhouette. This time, let's add more greens and purples into the wash. With every layer as the mountain approaches the viewer, colors get more intense, and so you can add more pigment. The treetops also get more sharp and defined, and for this I like to use the sponge. I dip it into fresh paint and then create stamps with it. You can try to shape the imprints to suggest the treetop shape. You can again add splatters of different color, golden watercolor and salt. This is all about finding some balance, and this kind of painting turns out differently every single time, which is really interesting and fun. Now let the wash dry naturally and you can observe how the salt effect blooms on the page. Last layer of mountains needs to be painted with the darkest mixture of color, and so you can add even more pigment. I tried to make these more dark green and purple color. Here I'm using sponge again to suggest the treetops. This last silhouette needs to be sharp, and so careful with the spray bottle. Only use it to diffuse the bottom, not the treetops anymore. I still want some pops of color and not just plain green forest, so I'll be adding magenta, purples, even Prussian blue to help me achieve some magical color effects. I'm adding gold and salt again. Lastly, some splatters and we let this dry completely. So then you can remove the tape and here is the first finished piece, the magical forest. In the second demo, I will be using the same colors as before and will be painting a study of a lavender field. For this demo, I'll sketch basic outlines with 2B pencil. First I draw the horizon and then I choose vanishing point where all the lines of the lavender field will try to meet. It is helpful to suggest the perspective of the land when painting this kind of subject, trying to indicate how our point of view affects everything that is in front of us. The basic idea is that objects closer to us always appear larger, and as they are farther away, they appear smaller and smaller until they disappear into the vanishing point. So this drawing is very simplified, but for a simple watercolor study this will do. So let's set up for painting. First I pre-wet the page with my modeler brush and I want to indicate some color of the sky. I'll be using magenta and orange and draw some lines to indicate these clouds. We need to work wet in wet here and let the colors merge together. I added some blues and then decided to switch my brush to oval wash to be able to get rounder shapes. Here I'm playing around with color, pushing them around and trying to create some cloud-like shapes. This part of the process is often trial and error. Clouds, they turn out sometimes very natural looking and other times I just end up with accidental blooms. But I don't mind because no matter what you end up with, if you're using transparent paint, it will still look like a sky. So now I'm moving the wash towards the field, and at this time we don't need a clear separation between sky and ground. We can establish that in the following layers. This is where the modeler gets very handy. I dipped it in some purple paint and here I'm drawing these field lines. This is just to establish the divisions so that I can build on this later with darker paint. I want to also indicate the color of the ground here, and so for this I'm mixing orange and purple. On top of this wash I use some table salt to create extra texture. I think this particular texture is great for indicating the lavender bushes as well as the roughness of the ground. Just a couple of adjustments and a bit of a splatter before I let this dry. In the second layer, I want to draw some mountains that are in the distance, and we need to do this with transparent paint. My tip here is to water down the paint a bit. One side of the house is also facing away from the light, so I'll color this with the same paint. I will dry this so that we keep the edges nice and sharp, because I want to make one wall of the house even a bit darker than the roof. Now we need to use negative painting technique to separate individual field lines. I am using my soft Neptune dagger brush for this and transparent but darker purple color. What is hard about this part is how the drawing of these shadows looks like. I'm going for something that is in between a straight line and messy edges. Here my tip is to experiment with shapes and try out different brushes. I like the versatility that the dagger brush provides. I can make a flat stroke or use it as a round brush without having to switch. And because it's long, it can retain large amounts of water, which allows me to draw this in one go. But you can have your own preference. Just find out what works for you and what creates the kind of shape that you will like. Another tip for this part of the process is try holding your brush at the end of its handle. This way your hand can move more freely and the brushstrokes won't look too controlled and stiff. Painting with watercolor often requires some speed. It is an expressive medium that allows to capture an essence of a scene very quickly. Now, when all is dry again, let's try to bring back some light into the painting. Sometimes my paint ends up less transparent than what I planned, but being able to use wet brush to dissolve and lift the pigment, it helps with this problem a lot. Here I'm painting the tree, then the door of the house and a few bushes. Try to suggest these with just a few lines. Tiny details like the lines in the background and a few birds in the sky can make the painting feel much more alive. We can now dry everything, remove the tape, and here is our finished painting lavender fields. For the third demo, I want to show you some architecture, and this one is particularly interesting as it's mostly white, so I thought this might be a fun challenge. We will paint Santorini sketch into our watercolor sketchbook. It's an awesome idea to bring the watercolor sketchbook to a vacation with you and create sketches like this one to remember different places and their atmosphere. Drawing architecture is a lot about practice, but I'll try to avoid focusing on too much detail in this one and only include the largest and most important areas into my sketch. I first block in some large shapes because this whole scenery looks like Lego blocks to me, but some of these blocks are rounder, some more square. So let's just start with positioning the largest blocks and then we can later on carve in smaller parts of the blocks inside. You can really get caught up in trying to add every single detail to your sketch, so if you can, try to resist the urge. The amount of detail doesn't add to the atmosphere of the final piece, it often takes away from it, and so it is crucial that we stay focused on what's important. This hones your ability to choose your focus whenever you paint. Paintings are different than photographs in a sense that they don't need to focus on description as much as on the emotion that you're trying to convey. This is my final sketch and I'm starting my first wash with pre-wetting the page with clean water. Actually try to only dampen the sky part, we do not want the blues to bleed into the white stone, so the building part needs to stay dry. Colors that we'll be using for this demo are Cobalt Blue Light, Cerulean Sky Blue, Turquoise Cobalt and Potter's Pink with Dragon's Blood. I mixed all three blues to create this sky color, but I made a little more saturated color at the bottom. Cerulean blue granulates beautifully and I just love this effect in the sky. Here you can see how flat brushes come in handy with buildings and architecture. Their flat shape is ideal to cover regularly shaped areas quite quickly. This Neptune square wash brush was really very helpful here. Here I'm adding a bit more color to the wash as I wanted the bottom to be more saturated and heavier than top of the page. I want to use the mix of Potter's Pink and Dragon's Blood to paint the roof here, and I didn't wait for the wash to dry. I like the effect when these colors mingle a little bit and they create some distortion here. I can then make some of the architecture at the bottom to be a bit more sharp in contrast. Now it's time to dry, and I will also make a note of all the colors to the left side of the sketchbook to show you how I mix them for the shadows of the buildings. I just have to say this Dragon's Blood color is as cool as the name. I love it, and it's awesome to try out these new shades in a painting. So when I look at the reference photo, I see two types of shadow color. Ones are warmer, a bit brownish gray color, and the other ones are more blue, even turquoise looking, taking in the color of the sky. So first I'll paint in the warmer shadows, and I discovered that I can get this color by mixing Cobalt blue with Dragon's Blood. You have to water down the mixture accordingly when painting the shadows. In some areas this paint will be a bit darker and in some will be very light. I'll start here as this shadow covers a larger area and the building is round, and so I have to blur the edge with wet brush. Next, I will be carefully observing the reference and painting in all the little shadow shapes that have this warmer color. It might be a longer process. In a way, this is quite relaxing. Once your pencil sketch guides you, then you can just focus on coloring between the lines. I'm also adding hints of more saturated color to a few areas where I feel the need to add a pop. And now let's mix the color for the cooler shadows, and I found that turquoise cobalt with the Dragon's Blood create a pretty good mixture. This will be more blue than the previous mixture, and when you look at the reference photo, these kind of shadows prevail around the bottom part of the photo. And so let's slowly paint them in one by one while carefully observing the reference photo. One tip for this part of the process is to be careful about the amounts of pigment that you are applying to the painting, because our subject is white stone and its shadows are still quite pale in comparison with the roof or the windows. I just think that it's good to make sure that we are watering down the paint. Watercolor always fades a little bit when it dries compared to how it appears when it's wet, and this is another factor that we have to keep in mind as we work. Here I'm applying a few tiny details and textures of the stone before I move on to the drawing darker lines of this wheel. In a painting like this, I always hold on until the last part of the process to add the darkest details, and dagger brush helps me with these expressive brush strokes, even dry brush lines here and there, so add a few accents to the roof and some to the windows. We can now remove the tape and the sketch is finished. I really hope that you enjoyed this lesson, and I will soon see you in another one where I will show you how to tackle animal motifs.